For this week's Raising Millionaires Wealth Call, I wanted to do things slightly different. We're not going to really go over macro market stuff. I'm not getting a lot of questions about that. Not getting a lot of response from it. So we're going to jump right into some lessons and then some questions so that we can create the greatest impact in your financial planning for your children. One thing that I've been thinking about lately is systematically investing for your children's financial future is the greatest way to be successful with this overall strategy. We use ERLI, which is the idea that the earlier you start, the easier it is. I get this question a lot, and it's not about doing it faster. It's about understanding how to create the impact that you want. So let's start with this question. What are 5 ways that I can make my child a millionaire? All right. The first one is to set up a Roth IRA with as little as $50 a month. This is like the home run strategy. If you start this when they're 1, if you start this when they're 10, just $50 a month will guarantee that they will be a millionaire in retirement. The next thing that you can do is save for their education. Now, this seems kind of counterintuitive to making them a millionaire. It's not the education itself that's going to do it, although that's going to help. Really what it is that you're not going to burden them with debt in their 20s, their 30s, even their 40s. And some of the papers that I'm reading is that people with advanced degrees are still paying off their loans in their 50s. When you look at the amount of money that they put towards debt payments on education, and you move that to investment accounts that compound over time, the numbers are astronomical. So you want to set up to pay for their education through a 529 account. The next way you can do it, this is kind of in legacy planning mode now, is you as the parent can set up the right whole life insurance for yourself. Now you can use the death benefit or you can use the cash value, and that's going to really help you set your children up to become millionaires. It's a way of buying wealth. The earlier you buy it in your life, the easier it is to grow that account and transition that to your children. Number 4 is building your own assets. Now, this can mean setting up a real estate investment portfolio. This can mean starting a business that has legs to live longer than you, or they can sell it. Building those assets in your own life and making them transfer to your children through proper estate planning or trusts can go a long ways to making your children millionaires in the future. And the core of all of this is just starting early. The earlier you start planning for any of these different types of strategies, the easier they are. Time is your friend when you start early. It's your enemy when you procrastinate and you start late. What is the best way to involve my spouse in the investment process and ensure that we're both on the same page? Let me start by telling you a story about how we do this in our family. We've done a divide and conquer strategy. That means that Krista is primarily responsible for the 529 accounts, making sure that they're funded every year and that we're on target. I've taken on the responsibility of funding the other accounts, their brokerage accounts, their bonds, their life insurance policies. It balances out to be a similar amount of money at the end, and it makes it easier for us to sit down and do our own internal financial planning because, of course, we've got a budget for the amount of money that we're going to put into these accounts. Now, there may be a different strategy for your family. It's dependent upon how much money each partner makes in the relationship and what they can afford to do at some given point in time. There's also ebbs and flows being an entrepreneur. So some years, Krista may have more money than I have available in December. Some years I might have more money available. I often find that I'm more of a January investor. She's more of a December investor. And there's different strategies for why that's the case. In fact, most people are December investors, getting it in for the tax year. I kind of look at the new year and I'm like, okay, this is my budget for the year. I want to get it done now so that anything that I want to do later is extra. It's a balancing act. It can work either way. How do I create a diversified portfolio that can weather economic downturns and market volatility? This is an interesting one. I've spent some time as a day trader, and the personality traits that you need to be successful in doing that dictate some of the long-term investing strategies that I implement now. The first thing is easy. For a diversified portfolio, Nothing's easier than an S&P index fund or ETF, primarily because you're getting 500 companies inside of that portfolio or inside of that instrument that gives you proper diversification. Now, if you put a chunk of your money into that and then you buy other individual stocks or do other types of investing, you're going to have great diversification because you're always going to have that underwriting element of diversification through the 500 companies in the S&P. The next one is use dollar cost averaging. The earlier in life that you set your goals for your children or for yourself, and you stay consistent, whether that's $50, $100, $200 a month into specific types of accounts, you get to ride out the market fluctuations. I've been through the dot-com boom and bust. I've been through the 2008 downturn. I've been through some of the economic cycles that we faced in the last few years with the pandemic. And the most financially rewarding model is to stay consistent throughout all of those time periods. So yes, sometimes you're buying at the top, but sometimes you're also buying at the bottom. And when you see a 30, 40% market correction and you continue to buy, you build that portfolio that starts compounding over time. The next one is that your sell dynamic needs to be based on goals. If you start dipping into funds here and there to do little things that aren't part of your goal-oriented plan, it significantly hurts your ability to compound value over time. So you want to avoid that at all costs. This is where emergency funds and proper goal structuring and planning come into play. What are some of the potential risks or challenges that I should be aware of when it comes to creating a financial plan for my children's future? And how can I mitigate or address those risks? This is a big question. The first one, and this is something that we're hearing about all the time right now, is interest rates and inflation. This is really why we do our annual review. If we've set a goal, we've got the proper instruments, we have a budget in place, and we're investing towards that goal, we have to understand that inflation and interest rates can change the metrics that we use to reach our goal. A great example is like when I was 20 years old, the idea of being a millionaire was freaking awesome. Today I'm in my 40s and I know that that same $1 million is not going to cover my retirement. And this isn't an exact measurement, but my view of it today is when I was 20 and I thought that I needed $1 million for retirement, today I need 2.4 million. That's not an exact compounding effect of interest rates or inflation on money. It has a little to do with lifestyle as well, but interest rates play a big part in that. If my strategy is to see a 10% annualized return, but interest rates are at 6-7% and inflation's been as high as 9%, I'm actually getting like a 1% return instead of a 10% return. Now, throughout my life when I was a child, I remember my parents buying a home at 13% interest rates. My mortgage on our primary family home is like 1.96. I was able to lock in at the bottom. I've seen interest rates as low, inflation rates close to zero or even negative inflation rates in my life. You can't jump out of the airplane with no parachute just because these numbers are changing. You have to continually adjust, and that's done best with an annual review where you take advantage of the current data to make additional contributions into your accounts in order to stay on pace with your goals, knowing that there's ebbs and flows in all of this. Those ebbs and flows in inflation rates and interest rates and inflation rates is also the second part of this, market volatility. Market volatility kind of plays into one of the things we're going to talk about in a second, but we've talked about in other videos. Dollar cost averaging is your best friend with time when it comes to the fluctuations of the market. Where market volatility plays a bigger role is in the third thing, and that's withdrawal timing. Meaning that you have to look at your portfolio and your time horizon. So what I've seen is individuals, once they get 55, 60, and they start to look at their portfolio and they look at what they plan on doing in retirement, they may actually adjust out of instruments like an S&P and maybe go into fixed rate bonds or annuities or other lower risk investment instruments, just because you don't want to turn 67 and have this beautiful retirement planned And then you see a 30 or 40% decrease in the market because of, I don't know, a pandemic, a war, a housing bubble, or a tech bubble. Like these are all things that we've seen. So your age, the timing of withdrawals is going to play a role in how to balance volatility so that you can continue to reach your goals. The next one is government policies. I've heard for as long as I've been an investor that the Roth IRA is going away, or being able to buy real estate through a self-directed IRA is going away, or the ability to transition a Roth IRA through generations without tax ramifications is going away. Now, there's constantly things changing in the tax code. There's constantly things changing with interest rates, tax rates. So you've got to pay attention to government policies. It is a risk in your portfolio that you can't necessarily fully plan for, but you can be aware of them so that you can plan for them accordingly as they come up. The last one is increasing longevity. I keep talking about retirement at 65, 67. The reality is that most entrepreneurs that I know don't ever retire. Now, that doesn't mean that they continue to work the same way that they have throughout their life, but they typically transition into some other model of income earning. That might mean that they go down to their condo in Myrtle Beach 2 weeks out of every month, but still are the president of a very large corporation, and that they've got their managers in place doing the day-to-day work, and that while they're on vacation, you can't call them. They've got the right people in place to make the right decisions. So their idea of retirement may be different than the teacher that has worked up to 65, 67 years old and now wants to retire and he just wants enough money to spend the next 12 to 17 years living off that retirement. Well, my children, hopefully, will live to be well into their hundreds and have very active lifestyles. My generation is expected to live into their late 70s, early 80s. But then I also see the previous generation, many of them living into their 70s and pushing 80 years old and being very active in life. So you have to be paying attention to your life longevity when you're planning, because as it stretches, which is a good thing, human beings living longer, your retirement funds also have to do the same. And you don't want to end up being a cashier at Walmart when you're 70 years old because you need to pay rent, right? What is the difference between a mutual fund and an ETF? This is a big question. There's a lot of different dynamics. I'm going to keep it simple, and we're just going to talk about two. Mutual funds are typically bought at a fixed dollar amount. So when I was growing up or just getting started in investing, ETFs weren't really a thing. Now, that's not to say they didn't exist, but you had mutual funds in your retirement accounts. And you would say, I'm putting $200 a month away into this mutual fund. And you could buy a fraction of a share. And then inside those mutual funds were managers that then went out and picked investments to put inside that portfolio. Now, they've got higher expense ratios because they're managed. They've got less liquidity and they've got less use case. So you're typically not going to buy a mutual fund through a brokerage account. I wonder if you even could. That's a question for another time. The second dynamic on an ETF is that increased liquidity, increased exposure to different assets. So like the SPY ETF, which is the S&P 500 ETF, is going to have much greater diversification inside of it. And when I say liquidity, I mean that I can log into my brokerage account, my Roth IRA, and I can buy and sell the different ETFs at the click of a button. Mutual funds are a little different. ETFs are dynamically priced based on the underlying assets inside of them. Mutual funds are interestingly repriced once a day based on the asset inside of them, so that when you buy them, the timing of buying them is significantly different than buying an ETF. Those are two core. Now, there are a lot more differences, but those are the two to understand. When I look at my portfolio, really the only instruments that I see that are mutual fund oriented are inside of the 529 accounts that we have for our children. Everything else is going to use ETFs or direct investments in stocks or other assets. This is a fun question. What are 3 books that I believed helped me to not only become a millionaire, but to change my relationship with money and building wealth? So the first one, I've talked about this more times than I can count, and I've probably given away 100 copies of this book. It's a framework for understanding the poverty mindset, or just understanding poverty. Why is this book important? I grew up in a blue collar, lower middle class family that had its financial struggles. And so I definitely grew up with a poverty mindset, meaning I was never introduced to investing. My access to capital or my understanding of how people got money was through loans, that you worked a 9 to 5 or greater just to pay your bills. And there was really nothing left after that. That's a poverty mindset. And you're not going to build wealth when you're thinking about things from a poverty mindset perspective. I can often tell when I'm talking to parents or I'm talking to people who want to invest and build wealth, there's certain little innuendos of things that they say where I instantly know that they have a poverty mindset. I give them a copy of this book. There's some charts in here that walk through how the poor versus the middle class versus the wealthy think about different aspects of life. And it's really important to understand those because you can move up between the different castes. I don't know if that's a fair word to use, but it's the reality of our economic model here in the United States. So I highly recommend this book if you grew up poor or you struggle with your relationship with money. I give this book to a lot of the projects that I invest in, the founders, because here's what typically happens in product development, and then I'm going to take this back to parents and building wealth for children, is that when you build a product or you are an entrepreneur and you want to offer a service, you want to focus in on the one thing that you are better at than most, if not everybody. I often see founders that are building, especially SaaS or software products. They get in and they start solving one problem and they see all this opportunity in problem number 2, problem number 3, problem number 4. And what they do is they start to dilute their value. Now, this also happens to us as individuals. We do talk about, like, we have our 9 to 5, that's how we pay our bills. We've got our side hustle, which is how we get the extra money for investing. That's the world that we live in. Most of us are like that. What we hope is that our side hustle becomes our main thing because it's our passion. It's what we love to do. It's where we just get our energy fulfilled in taking action. That is kind of dilution of your one thing, but it's also a focus on a mission to get that one thing to be your primary thing over time. So I commend you for doing that. But inside that one thing, that side hustle, focus, focus, focus. I had a mentor, and I've seen this all over the place, so I'm sure it wasn't unique to him. But if you have a plan B, you're probably not going to succeed in your plan A. Now, that's not directly from this book, but they talk about how focusing in on when you're working on a task, focus in on accomplishing that task, eliminate distractions, find that one thing that's going to create the greatest impact in your life, that's going to create the greatest impact in your finances, and go all in on it and burn all other bridges. You're going to find greater success by focusing in on that one thing. And there's so many different ways to look at that dynamic. This one, I just absolutely love. I've read the book. I've listened to the audio multiple times. It's The Wealthy Gardener by John Soforic. This book is a set of congruent short stories that are told from the perspective of a wealthy individual getting towards the end of his life and wanting to pass down his knowledge to his community. So there's multiple players in this. There is an individual that he treats as a son. And I will be honest, the first time I read this book, I cried a little bit at the end as some of these dynamics come to light. But it's so emotionally impactful because of that. And the lessons that he wants to teach aren't like, I'm going to write this down, here it is, go learn it. They're through experiences. The way that I like to convey this to my children is that we planted a garden. We planted it 3 years ago. Some of the plants that we planted in that garden are not going to show their flowers until this year, the 3rd year. Those are primarily my peonies. We've planted apple trees. We're not going to get fruit off of those apple trees for many years to come. That's the same fundamental of investing. My kids are 1 and 5. But they understand that, like, we go out and it's springtime, so we're going through our garden, we're picking out the weeds. Some of the plants that have overgrown, like our mint plant is trying to take over a whole section of the garden. We have to trim it back. Some of the plants have outgrown their space. We have to move them, and we have to cultivate the environment in which they grow in. My daughter absolutely loves this. We went to the store this weekend and she got to pick out something. You know what she picked out? She picked out a freaking gardening shovel because she wanted one like Dad that was her size. And the thing that I love the most is she's like, Dad, this one's metal. It's not one of those cheap plastic ones that's going to break. This is her starting to understand the tools. Like, she could have picked out a Barbie, for God's sake, but she wanted a shovel to work in her garden. She's going to work with me over the years in this garden. She's going to see the fruits of her labor. She doesn't know that I'm teaching her investment strategies or financial planning for the future. And I freaking love that. So if you want to get a vision of how the wealthy think because it's not in your mind yet, The Wealthy Gardener is a great book to help you do that. This next one really isn't about wealth building. This is something that I implemented in my life. I started working on it in 2017, and it's now 2018, and it's a full fundamental part of everyday life. And the strategy is that what are 3 ways to spend more time with my family? This is a good one. I'll tell you a rule first. Often I talk to entrepreneurs or even working professionals, and they're like, I'm killing myself to make a living, to build my wealth. How do I spend more time with my family? The rule is, don't baby step into it. Everyone that I see that's like, okay, over the next 6 months, I'm going to start doing this incrementally, and then I'm going to get to this point where I can do this with my kids. I tried that. I started practicing in 2017. It rolled into 2018 until my daughter was born. And then finally, one day I was like, F this. I want to spend more time with my daughter. How am I going to do it? So 3 things. Number 1, I got rid of voicemail on my phone. Like, how does that help? It was the first step to training people who communicate with me that the best way to reach me is through text and email. That caused my phone to ring less. And in reality, everyone hates voicemail. Real, right? Like, I despise when people send me voice messages on like Telegram or they send it to me in chat. I don't listen to them. And I told them I don't listen to them, and some people keep sending them. Those are typically not people I'm going to have a constant or an ongoing communication relationship with. I just don't need to. The next one is shut your phone off at 4 o'clock. Now, why did I go like this? I have a place on the kitchen counter. When I come home, my phone goes there. It's not walking around with me when I'm out in the yard gardening or I'm up in the playroom playing, or even if I'm sitting watching TV with the kids and I'm cuddling. I'm not sitting there scrolling through social media. I'm there with my kids. I'm present, and our relationship benefits from that presence. Now, if the phone rings, I can get up, I can walk into the kitchen, and I can look at it. 9 times out of 10, it's my wife calling about, hey, I'm going to be late, or let's do this with the kids, or let's do this for dinner. Great. I'm not cutting myself off from the world. I've also trained my clients. They know they can call me anytime between 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern. If they call after, not going to answer. They also can't leave me a voicemail. Typically means they're going to send me an email. Perfect. Now I can respond to it on my own time. I'll be totally honest. If I go to the bathroom, I grab my phone. I can knock out a couple things there. Come on, many of you do it as well. Or 8 o'clock, kids are in bed. I'm going to lay down. Maybe I'm going to sleep. Maybe I'm going to watch TV for an hour. If I wanted to, I can go through it. Most of the time, I don't. But it's there and it's on my own terms, right? And via email or text, I already know the response mechanism. I hate when people want to send you a voice message and then you send them an email and then it's as if they didn't know the email was coming because there's not connection between the messaging. Makes life so much easier. The third one is I wanted to have half days on Friday. And it took me a little time to realize that all I needed to do was have a half day on Friday. Phone off or in the kitchen. Not going to answer it. There is no voicemail. Send me an email. I'll get back to you whenever. My clients, my students, they're trained on this as well. Now, that doesn't mean I can't do things on Friday. Typically, daughter's 5, son's 1. I like them to take a nap on Friday afternoon because once the weekend starts, our 8 o'clock bedtime can kind of go out the window. Like last week on Friday at 9:30 at night, my daughter and I were walking through the woods in the pouring rain looking for owls. It was beautiful. And then on Saturday, we had like back-to-back events. We went to the Cleveland Zoo, then we stopped by to see my dad. By the time we got home, it was 3:30. We totally missed our afternoon naps. So Friday afternoon, sometimes they nap. I can do phone calls during that time, but I don't schedule anything at that time. My team, my clients, my students, they know. You can do this in your life. Even if you work a 9 to 5, delete your voicemail. Tell people, send me an email. They'll learn over time and they'll actually respect and appreciate you setting boundaries. Put your phone in the kitchen and don't answer it after 5 p.m. when you get off work. You can set boundaries in your professional environment to tell people that like, hey, this is my family time. I'm not available. And you know what? If the people that you work for can't respect that, you're working for the wrong people. If you're working a 9 to 5, you might not be able to do the half days on Fridays. But in your side hustle, build it into your side hustle, because the whole goal, of course, is that someday that side hustle becomes your primary income earner and you don't have to deal with the BS of the bureaucracy of that 9 to 5. Those are 3 simple ways to take control of your time and spend more time with your family, which in the end is why most of us are here. We want that increased relationship with our children. We want to work for our family, but we don't want to kill ourselves. Take control of your life, your time, and you will benefit from it greatly. All right. I appreciate everyone joining us this week for the weekly wealth call. This week, my partner Richard and I in the Raising Millionaires brand will be heading to Omaha to go to Warren Buffett's annual meeting for Berkshire Hathaway. It was funny when Richard called me this year and said he wanted to go. He's like, dude, he's getting old. I don't know how many more years he's going to do this. We need to go. I was like, F it. Let's go. It'll be an experience. Make sure you have experiences in your life. I appreciate you. Peace.